Welcome to It's a Yes, Making It in Media, the podcast that really helps you get hired and stay inspired in the world of media sales. I'm Jo Wood, MD of the Media Exchange.
And I'm Debra Sharron, founder of Media Sales Training. Today we're exploring one of the most exciting spaces in media right now, audio and podcasts. From digital radio and streaming to podcasting and programmatic, the UK audio landscape is booming. And with that growth comes real demand for talented sales professionals who can help brands find their voice. We're delighted today to be joined by two experts, Russell Pedrick from News UK and Andy Goldsmith, formerly of Audioboom UK, both of whom sit right at the coalface of audio sales in this country. But first, let's set the scene. So Jo, shall we start off by talking about the big picture? Incredibly, radio, as we know it, reaches over 49 million UK adults every week. Smart speakers, have you got one at home?
Of course.
Is that how you listen to audio content?
Absolutely.
So how many homes in the UK have smart speakers that they're using to access all their audio?
I've no idea, Deborah, but as ever, I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Well, it's over 20 million UK homes. So if you add that into the mix, then you've got an incredibly powerful way of being able to offer advertisers access to their audiences. One area that I think we need to really unpick is the area of programmatic audio. What does that look like?
So you're talking about things like Global's DAX, Bauer's Z, and News UK's Octave, and the supporting tech from the likes of AdsWiz, and how they opened audio up to a whole new pool of advertisers, making audio much more accessible, targeted, and measurable.
So actually creating a much more laser-focused way of an advertiser being able to connect with their audience.
Completely. And really, all of the big players are jumping into that space now. So you've got Global, Bauer, News UK that Russell's going to talk to us about later. And then you've got things like Spotify and Amazon and Apple, all of whom are operating in the same kind of space.
It's so diverse. And I think that's why it's really good to be familiar with Radar and Radio Centre as being the two main resources that anybody interested in this space should be familiar with. Just being to really able to understand what the numbers look like and to be able to build out sales arguments, where Radio Centre does some brilliant work in being able to help justify audio investment to a client who might be thinking about getting involved for the first time. Who tends to be most active using audio today? What kind of clients?
So historically, audio has always been particularly strong with retail and supermarkets, but there's now just an array of brands that obviously see the value, and that is widening massively. So you've got financial services, automotive, FMCG, drinks brands, tech companies. Everybody is finding a different way of using the whole audio podcast space to complement their spending, making a real joined up campaign.
I think that's true. And I think what audio is being able to deliver so well is a really strong brand building presence, but also that direct response, because you can't really think of a media channel that can add that immediacy quite so effectively as audio.
So what do you think it really takes to succeed in a sort of audio environment right now from a sales perspective?
Well, when you were talking before about the shift towards programmatic, I suspect that means that data literacy is becoming a more important skill. Just being able to read the data, interpret what it's telling us, and then being able to build out a compelling audience story to take to market. But how many people are just selling audio, Jo? Is it increasingly part of a cross-platform type of solution, or have you got many sales houses that are just selling the audio opportunity?
A lot of the big players in the space have got focused audio teams, but they do try and create an integrated campaign. The combination of audio and a podcast, that might be a valuable opportunity. But as I say, it's really linking up the whole campaign, and it could be absolutely across media.
The word podcast, any idea where it came from?
No idea at all, but I think you're going to tell me.
Well, only by cheating and looking at AI am I able to tell you that actually a British journalist working on The Guardian coined the phrase back in 2004. And he made it up to describe something which was the mixture of an iPod and a broadcast. At the end of last year, we got to about 4 million different podcasts in the world. And I read recently that in the States, more people listen to a podcast every month than voted in the last American election. And people are passionate about what they listen to, and they feel really connected. It feels from conversations that we've had in recent months that the challenge has been how to monetize this opportunity. The industry seems to have developed as a brand new entity to work out where the revenue is going to come from, given how much time people are spending listening to podcasts and also how easy it is to produce a podcast. I suppose with podcasting, the advertiser's message is an interesting part of the listener experience because we have the facility to skip the ads, which is why, as we'll hear from our experts, the sponsored host-read message has the greatest impact.
That's a really unique thing, isn't it? That host-read message. It sort of connects the brand that's being promoted with the host and the podcast in a very special way that makes it more credible and makes you more likely to go and buy something.
Well, as always, the IAB, the Internet Advertising Bureau, has a stack of really interesting data. And what their latest stats would suggest is that podcast revenue has grown about 8% to about £100 million in the UK. So it's not quite yet in the billions, which some of the more mainstream media channels probably are. But what's interesting is the rate of growth that is really gaining momentum. So podcasts are part of the whole digital ecosystem, and this particular element is growing at an exponential rate.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I read somewhere that really brands are increasing their audio budgets because podcasts are solving a unique sort of screen fatigue kind of space. So you don't have to be staring at something, you're listening to something while you're doing something else or traveling somewhere or in the gym or wherever you might be.
Jo, do you think that a media channel that is actually taking us away from a screen is going to be winning just because it gives us a chance to reboot and to be able to get past that fatigue?
I really do. And listening to podcasts, brands suddenly realize they can reach an audience when actually they're very receptive.
And what's interesting as you look at this market is that it's diversifying. So maybe a lot of podcasts have been direct to the public or consumers, but we've got this pot of business to business podcasts, which are growing very quickly, like ours, where actually to be able to identify a very narrow market, but develop a deep relationship with that audience is a very interesting business-to-business opportunity.
And then there's this thing, isn't it, with the advent of video podcasts. I know we were just talking about getting away from a screen, but actually if you fall in love with your presenters, you can now watch them, learn about them, and really engage with the podcast on a completely different level.
There is definitely a move towards having a show on in the background, maybe looking at the presenters from time to time, then carrying on with whatever it is you're doing. Rather than it purely being an audio experience. If our listeners were interested in moving into selling podcasts, what kind of, where should they be looking?
So many of the media businesses have now incorporated podcasts as part of their commercial offering, but there are obviously specific companies that just focus on podcasts. So you've got the likes of Audioboom and Acast. In fact, a lot of the what I would call sort of old school publishers are beginning to incorporate podcasts as part of promoting their events. So there's lots of areas that you can look at.
Yeah, so what I'm understanding is that you could either be working for a mainstream publisher and selling on their podcast as that grows, or you could be working within an organization that represents a whole group of podcasts where you're talking about a podcast listening audience and selling that into agencies. Would that be the way the landscape looks?
Completely. And that landscape is changing all the time as well. As people work out, as we said earlier, how to monetize podcasts and what is the best way to promote them.
I guess that when you're looking at how these podcasts make their revenue, there are a number of different models. And if they're selling display ad spots, then unless they've got a certain scale of audience, it's going to be a more difficult sell. So the experimentation and the creativity on how podcasts are developing their revenue model is still work in progress. And I'm interested to know, from a recruitment point of view, whether the people who are most likely to be placed in podcast sales are naturally passionate about listening to podcasts.
I always think back to a lady who was one of my favourite people in media, a woman that you may have come across, Debra, called Kathy Neal. And she always said that to be a good salesperson, you didn't need to be passionate about the product. You needed to learn how to sell. And she enjoyed somebody coming in and saying to her, I want to work on the music titles. And she would almost always offer them a role on bird watching yesterday to see whether they would still buy into moving into sales. Does it help if you're passionate about what you're selling on? Yes. Yeah. Do you have to be passionate? No. So if you're interested in podcasts just because they're growing really quickly and it's one of the most exciting mediums to work in, you should definitely go for it. But you don't have to be a massive listener yourself. Although I guess if you are, that might make you a tiny bit better than somebody who isn't.
I remember Kathy well, and I think that that's extremely good advice. And of course, I believe that people all can be taught to sell if they understand the benefits of what they're selling. Just to let you know, if you want an easy way to remember and apply the ideas from today's episode, we've got something to help. Head over to makingitinmedia.com and sign up for our newsletter. After every episode, we'll send you the key insights and practical takeaways that you can use to help you get hired, stay inspired, and build a successful career in media. That's makingitinmedia.com, and the link's in the show notes. So we've talked about why audio and podcasts are growing so quickly, but what's it actually like to work in podcasting today? And where are the opportunities for people building a career in media? To find out, we spoke to someone who's been right at the heart of that growth. Andy Goldsmith, formerly of Audioboom UK.
So Goldie, welcome to the show. You and I have known each other a really long time. I thought it'd be really good for our listeners if you just talk us through your journey, how your career has evolved and how you've moved from audio into podcasts.
So my career started in the world of magazines and publishing. And I was, I suppose, quite lucky there because when I was at IPC, it was really when digital and internet publishing or online publishing started to overtake traditional legacy print publishing. I'll jump ahead a little bit. Podcasting has got so much in common with magazines. A lot of people don't connect the dots, probably because for a lot of people now, magazines are like, what are magazines? But magazines always and still are about passion, and people still hand over money in a shop to buy a magazine, whatever that is that they're into. Podcasting, although there's not the same transaction of cash, you're downloading, you're making a decision to spend time with that content, and it's about passions. So I've always felt like, although I'm in a totally different media now in podcast, it's a full circle moment for me. I'm going back to a point where, I'm representing talent and I'm representing publishers that is all about passion.
So you worked at Global, didn't you, for quite a while? In the audio team. So did that make it easier to move into podcasts, do you think?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Global played a significant part in where I've ended up. I think at Global, what I realized was that audio is such an incredible media. It's got so many strengths. It's so important in people's everyday lives. Power of audio is that individuals, they overlay the imagery from their own personal experiences, which makes, your relationship with audio just that little bit deeper.
So one of the things that I think for our sort of listeners to understand, just in case they haven't worked in a podcast environment before, is from a commercial point of view, what do you actually sell?
We still are educating the media marketplace a little bit. There's two types of advertising. There's traditional standard spot ads, so pre-recorded 30-second spot ads that we dynamically insert into the content. So when an individual decides to stream, download, press play on that podcast, the ad is then inserted into that episode in pre-ordained ad marker slots. We call them radio style ads, the stuff that you would listen to on Heart and Classic and Hits Radio. The education piece comes from try not to just utilize the same radio ad. Try and create a version of that ad that is more for the podcast listener, because it's a very different experience. Broadcast radio, it tends to be a tertiary media. It's in the background, and therefore the ads have to shout at you, and you have to listen to them over and over again. The opportunity to hear the OTH is relatively high so that those ads can work. It's very different in podcasting. It's usually intimate. It's one-on-one, and therefore those kind of shouty ads, they tend to jar with the content a little bit. So there's the education pieces. The other ad that we sell, which is really where the magic is, are host reads. You lean into the relationship that the host has with their audience, let them play with the content a little bit. They tend to help with the scripting. There are other things that we sell that are deeper. So branded segments, branded series, and other bespoke content. Joe, the other thing is that podcasting is leading more and more and more into the world of video because it brings in a very different audience. It helps discoverability, but of course, it also lends a visualization to that podcast, not just the audio.
That's really interesting. So if you actually look at the whole podcast space, what do you think it is that makes a podcast succeed?
So podcasting is genuinely unique. Just from a practical point of view, podcasting hasn't displaced other media. So in an individual's media day or media week, what podcasting hasn't done is said, you must stop doing this in order to consume me. Because podcasting is effectively filled dead time. It's cooking, it's walking the dog, it's going for a run, it's going to the gym. It's additive to people's lives. There's a lot of research into this now, a lot of qualitative research as well about why people listen to podcasts. It's predominantly around education. The second thing is entertainment. But mainly people like podcasts because it gives them social ammunition. It teaches them things. It helps them in their daily lives. What you're doing here is you're helping people, navigate their professional lives in the world of media. What's the next move? How do I get that job? How do I even get into this industry? That is a really, really, really big reason why podcasting it had its hockey stick moment during COVID. It kind of professionalized the industry. Let's say there was a lot of talent, comedians, even actors, but didn't have a lot of work going on. People weren't able to go and watch them gig. So they took up podcasting, I suppose. And this is a very generalized comment. What was a hobbyist kind of media became the world of celebrity to an extent. And the reason why more and more people come to it is because there's just more content, there's more choice than ever before. So it does that. And the other thing I want to touch on is what happens in podcasting a lot of the time is that the listener creates this parasocial relationship with the host. You genuinely feel that they're your friend to the point where if you saw them walking towards you in the street, you might stop them and say hello. And then the host would go, "Who the hell are you?" It'd be a bit of a weird scenario. It's a phenomenon that's existed forever. People have parasocial relationships with actors and pop stars and anybody in the public eye. It happens so quickly with the listener and the host. And that's actually where the strength of the brand opportunity is so big.
There's one more question from Chloe in London, who's basically saying, what developments do you expect to happen in the podcast space over the next 18 months or so? What exciting things do you think are coming down the line?
Without sounding like I'm a broken record on behalf of the industry, video is central to the biggest changes that we're going to be seeing in the industry over the next 12 to 8, without a doubt. I'll come to AI in a minute because we can't get around AI either. But video is very important. The reason for that is that the one of the biggest problems podcasting has is discoverability. And of course, video helps us with that. Moving content onto YouTube, moving content, and obviously Spotify and Apple are making big changes in incorporating video into their apps. Less than 10% of podcasts at the moment have a video element. So the opportunity for growth is huge. It helps also to bring in additional ad revenues, as you can imagine. I think the biggest impact that AI is going to have on podcasting is going to be around measurement. And it's going to be around lowering the cost of entry for people into this space. AI isn't going to necessarily make waves in terms of the content we actually see, because the whole point of podcasting is authenticity. It's real people, real voices. But I do see a point where AI helps around efficacy, evidence, proof, analytics, data. And I could also see a point where AI helps to reduce the cost of entry for creators. The reason why less than 10% have got videos right now is because the cost is huge. Because the industry has been professionalized, the consumers got used to a standard of visualization, a standard of what that video podcast should look like. And that's quite expensive. And I think AI is going to help to reduce the cost.
One last really important question before you go. Our signature question. What's your best yes?
My best yes. I got introduced to the two co-founders of Adalicious, which is the business that I joined during lockdown that we sold last year to Audioboom. And all they had was Adalicious Limited. They had a network of 4 podcasts and about 1.5 million listeners a month. But I totally and utterly believed in what we could turn that business into. It was a hard yes, because it was like, oh my God, You know, this is right at the start, but it's turned into the best yes ever, because we grew that company from 4 podcasts to around 250 and grew it from 1.5 million listeners to peaking at about 30 million listeners a month. Genuinely, I think it's easier to make some of these decisions when you've gone through 3 or 4 roles and you know what you want and where you think the opportunities are. But it's the best yes I've ever. It's the best yes for me. I mean, it's given me fun, laughter, enjoyment, professional success.
I remember when you made that decision to say that yes, none of us knew how it was going to pan out, and it's just fab that it has been the way it's been.
And that was Andy Goldsmith sharing why podcasting has become such a powerful and fast-growing part of today's media landscape. So while Andy gave us the perspective from inside the podcast industry itself, our next guest sees the wider evolution of digital audio and commercial media every day. Russell Pedrick is Managing Director of Octave at News UK, where he works across digital audio, advertising, and the future of commercial media.
Lovely to have you with us today, Russell. So you've been in digital pretty much your whole career. When you reflect on the whole thing, and as somebody who now recruits, do you think it's as difficult or as easy to get those kind of opportunities that you've secured now if you were starting out in media? Do you think the opportunities are the same or different?
Thank you for having me on. I would encourage anyone that is coming out of university or young to look at media. There are so many exciting opportunities in it. There's always new roles coming up. One of my first bosses at News UK said to me, she went, the great thing about media is your next job probably doesn't exist yet. And I think that's so true. And that has been the case for me with the 3 different promotions I've had at News UK in 10 years. My next job didn't exist. Media is constantly evolving. It moves with technology. It moves with the times. So it can be scary, but at the same point, if you work hard and you learn, then there'll be opportunities for you.
I think that leads really interestingly into a question that came into the podcast from a listener, Russell, who was keen to know, based on your experience, how different the mindset needs to be to succeed maybe in audio compared to in wider digital media. So, I mean, what do you think are the major differences?
It's not hugely different, if I'm honest with you. A lot of the characteristics are the same. I suppose audio as an industry is a bit more fast paced, but moving over to digital audio, a lot of the people that are in that industry either used to work in radio, or what you'd call older radio, or digital. And a lot of the people, I mean, my operations team, vast majority of them are a digital background. Whilst there are nuances, the mindset, I would say, is largely the same, is what I've found.
We have been asked by listeners, looking ahead, what kind of trends we should be paying attention to in the audio space over the next 12 to 18 months. So
I think, there's a couple of big things. I think, I know we'll touch on AI again in a minute, because you can't really do anything at the moment without talking about AI. I think that the world of audio has changed a lot. Even if you think about our traditional radio stations, they're not radio stations anymore. You know, TalkSport now, our biggest station, TalkSport, we don't really call it a radio station anymore. It's a media brand. It's generating 200 million video views a month. You know, I've had some feedback from my sales team recently where they've been going in and obviously talking to agencies, and some of the younger planner buyers at agencies now are turning around and going, I didn't realize that was a radio station, because they consume it on YouTube, or they consume it on TikTok or Instagram. Even when we look at our audience data, there's not actually a massive crossover between the radio listeners and podcast listeners. They're quite different audiences. The obvious big topic at the moment everyone's is talking about is, podcasts and what are podcasts now? Everything we do now is visualized. We when we first started visualizing our podcast, people are going to stop listening to them, but that's not been the case. Listening's continued to grow. It's delivering the same content to how people want to consume it. So I think the audio and video side will continue to blur, I suppose, in some respects, but also complement each other. AI is going to continue to change the way that all of digital media works, right the way from an agency perspective, their planning tools, their buying tools that they will use, how do media owners plug into that. I think we'll continue to see advancements in particularly on the advertising side. I think there's some scary parts to it as well, just from a personal perspective, in that you can now create a podcast just with AI. You can clone a couple of voices and.
Sorry, Russell, is that cloning people and then reproducing them? So Joe and I could have an AI version of the podcast without actually having a conversation, just by tapping into our profiles.
Yes, we're actually exploring it with our talent at the moment. We're taking it step by step, but one of the interesting, even for things like, a host reads on a podcast, rather than getting a host to do several reads every week for different brands, we'll take the voice, clone it, and then the host doesn't have to do it again. Now, so that's the kind of things that would be good. I suppose for me, the bit which no one can answer is where does it end? How far does it go? And then I think we will have to put guide rails around that. The media industry will also have to put guardrails around that. So I think we'll be looking to bodies like the IAB to make sure that what's protected is protected. What needs to be protected is protected.
So when you're thinking about commercial media generally, does everything that you're seeing that AI can do make you worry about your own role and the role of people in media going forward, or is it there'll always be a human?
I think there's a natural instinct to worry, right? I think it would all be a bit silly if we said we didn't all think about it at some point. I think the way I've approached it, and my team has certainly been encouraged to approach it, is to embrace it. We went out to market last year with Octave AI, and the response we've had has been phenomenal. It's been brilliant, and it's been a real commercial success for us. But we're also being encouraged to use, AI for research, to help in proposals, to drive efficiencies right across the board, to make you better at your role, not necessarily to replace you. It's to enhance what you can do. So that's the way I'll always encourage people to do it.
And if you were going to take somebody on tomorrow, what do you think it would really take for somebody to succeed in the space at the moment?
I think a lot of it is still very similar to what it was, when I first started out in the industry. That real kind of entrepreneurial spirit goes a long way, a real drive, a passion for it. I've always been more on the sales commercial side of things. I love having a number on my head. I've always been driven by having a goal and making sure I get there, and then that sense of achievement when you get there. That is still as important today as it was, when I first started out, for sure. There is obviously different skill sets that are required now and will be required in the future. We've talked about it a bit already, but people are going to need to understand AI, and they're going to need to understand the technology. I suppose the media ecosystem is not as simple as perhaps it was 20, 30 years ago. It is more complex now. So, I suppose there's an element, we need people to be smart and understand that. The kind of fundamentals are still the same. Even when we recruit young salespeople now, or young operations people, right, we still look for that get up and go, and you still need to understand how to communicate to different people at different times.
And one of our listeners has asked whether relationships are still important. So what you're describing is different ways of building relationships.
Relationships are still absolutely key. Yeah, definitely. And I still maintain my next job might not yet exist. And you kind of got to embrace that change. A lot of people are really worried about change, and I understand why. It's natural human instinct to go, what does that mean for me? What does that? Oh no, I'm not. But you do have to, particularly in media, our industry will not look the same in 5 years. It's going to change, particularly with the speed and pace of technology as it changes at the moment. So you can either sit there and sort of go into a shell and then not do anything about it, or you embrace it.
So finally, our signature question, what's been the best yes that you've ever had along the way?
I'm in the biggest role I've ever done in my career now. And that has to be, I think there's two. There's on a professional basis, and I'll finish with a personal one. I think from a professional basis, when I was appointed as managing director of the size of the company that we are, and the organisation that we are, and it's a real privilege to do what I do. And people have put a lot of trust and faith in me. And of course, up to that point, I've been with News UK for 9 years, so I know I'd established myself. But then going into a whole that for me was I suppose when I first went into it, I'd be lying if I said well, this is a challenge, and it was. But I've also come out the other side of that now, and that was what amazing experience to have gone through, and what an achievement for me, I suppose, when I look back on it. From a personal perspective, I've got a 5-year-old son, and becoming a father just changes your perspective on so many things. And so yeah, and again, trying to juggle both is a whole new challenge in itself, right? So yeah, there'd be the two yeses, both from a professional and a personal perspective.
I just love that part, don't you, Debra?
I think it's fascinating. No, there's never going to be two answers the same, but each one is an insight into what motivates you and what kind of makes life continuously exciting. Our Yes List recommendation this episode is the book Alchemy The Surprising Power of Ideas That Don't Make Sense by Rory Sutherland, Vice Chairman of Ogilvy. His core idea is simple. People don't behave logically, they behave psychologically. And that's where most media thinking can fall down. For example, a podcast host-read ad often outperforms a single digital ad, not because it's more efficient on paper, but because it feels like a trusted recommendation. Same with audio. Bundle radio with digital or outdoor, and it suddenly feels like a bigger, more impactful campaign. That's alchemy. Perception drives value. And if you're selling audio, that's really important.
Thanks for listening to It's a Yes, Making It in Media.
Do follow the show and share it with someone who's serious about getting results in their media career.
Send us your questions to hello@makingitinmedia.com.
We're running a live and interactive Zoom training workshop very soon. The links are in the show notes.